Hey church, great to be with you. My wife and I have been having this conversation for years now about having a garden in our backyard. We've tried gardening in the past, and we hope in the future to have this Slager homestead where all of the food that comes to our table was somehow raised in the backyard. Fresh fruits, vegetables, leafy greens, everything that you'd want to have on your table. There's one problem. I tend to kill everything I try to grow. I just don't have a green thumb. I don't know how this whole thing works. I can never figure it out. When it comes to gardening, I'm horticulturally hopeless. It's just not going to happen. I'm not a gardener. But when we look at the scriptures in a different light, not physically speaking, we actually see that God calls us to garden in a different way. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, starting in verse 5, Paul asks this question. He says, "What then is Apollos?" So let's stop for a moment. Contextually, this church had been having these fights about who's the best Christian leader, who's the best pastor, who's the best teacher, who's the best preacher, stuff we still fight about today. And he says this, "What then is Apollos?" Well, he was the greatest teacher of his time. Who's Paul? He was the greatest evangelist and missionary who ever lived. And he says this about them, "They're just servants through whom you believed, as the Lord assigned to each." Jesus gets the credit. "I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth." Apollos can't take credit for the growth. Paul can't take credit for the growth. Only God can take credit for the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. He who plants and he who waters are one, and each will receive his wages according to his labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. God has called each and every one of us to be fellow gardeners in this field, in God's garden, all of his church, all of his people, and the role that he's given us. Paul talks about it like this: plant and water. Plant and water. How do we plant? We throw seeds. We talk about Jesus. How do we water? We talk about Jesus. And then where does growth come from? Doesn't come from us. Doesn't come from our gospel proclamation. Doesn't come from how we throw seeds. Doesn't come from how we water those seeds. It's only God who brings the growth. So let me encourage you this week, church, as you try to share your faith with others, don't put the pressure on yourself of the growth. What God has called us to is just talk about him. Talk about Jesus and what he's done in your life. So this weekend, Thursday, 6:45, Sunday morning, 9 o'clock and 10:45, we are going to turn our eye towards evangelism. Talk about sharing our faith. We're going to be looking at Colossians chapter 4, verses 2 through 6, where Paul really starts to bring his letter to the church of the Colossians to a close as he encourages them with a sense of urgency to get out there and share their faith. So let me encourage you, be with us this weekend. Look forward to being with you.